My mother sent a message in the family WhatsApp group inviting everyone to Mother's Day dinner except me. She explicitly wrote that all her children were successful, except for me, because I chose to be a lowly teacher, and she no longer viewed me as her daughter. She thought she was cutting off a struggling public servant who could barely pay rent. She had no idea she was actually disowning the state's most powerful anonymous investor who had just closed a $120 million contract with the governor. I did not confront her. I just calmly moved away. Before I tell you how I made her regret every single word, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe success is the best revenge. My name is Zara, and I am 34 years old. It was a Tuesday evening when my phone buzzed on the mahogany coffee table. The notification light blinked incessantly, indicating a flurry of messages in the group chat titled, "The Elite Robinsons." This was a digital shrine my mother, Patricia, had built to worship her own ego and the achievements of my older brother, Darnell. I picked up the phone, expecting the usual passive-aggressive comments about my career choice. But what I read was far more direct and brutal than I anticipated. My mother had typed a paragraph that must have taken her minutes to compose. It read, "Darnell just closed another deal on Wall Street and bought a new Porsche. We are celebrating this Sunday at the Capitol Grill. Zara, do not come. We are discussing high-level finances and family legacy. You chose to wipe noses and teach special needs brats for $45,000 a year. You are a stain on our potential. Do not show your face until you get a real job." Below her message, Darnell had simply reacted with a thumbs-up emoji. His wife, Courtney, had sent a private message seconds later that popped up on my screen saying, "Don't be sad, sweetie, if you need food stamps. I have some coupons my maid did not use." I sat there in the silence of my living room. The old Zara, the one who begged for approval in her 20s, might have cried. She might have typed out a desperate paragraph defending the nobility of teaching or pleading to be included. But that Zara died years ago. The woman sitting on the sofa simply took a slow sip of her $200 vintage Cabernet and felt a strange sense of relief. I did not type a response. I did not leave the group in a rage. I simply opened the settings menu. I tapped on my mother's contact and selected block contact. I did the same for Darnell, and finally, for Courtney. Then I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. I was not sitting in a cramped studio apartment as they imagined. I was standing in a $5 million penthouse overlooking the glittering skyline of Chicago. The lights of the city reflected in the glass, capturing the image of a woman wearing a silk robe that cost more than my mother's entire wardrobe. They thought I was a lowly teacher because that is what I let them believe. They saw a woman grading papers for autistic children and assumed poverty. They did not know that I had started investing in Bitcoin and real estate in 2015. They did not know that the building my mother lived in was managed by a shell company I owned. They did not know that the very school I taught at was funded by my personal charity foundation. I looked down at the streets below where ordinary people were rushing home and felt a cold resolve settle in my chest. My mother wanted to disown the poor teacher. Fine. I would give her exactly what she wanted. But when she finds out who actually holds the keys to this city, she is going to wish she had never pressed send. This was not just a family feud anymore. This was a war, and I had already won before they even fired the first shot. To understand why I blocked my family without shedding a single tear, you have to see the dinner that happened exactly 14 days prior. It was my father Otis' 60th birthday. For anyone else, a 60th birthday is a celebration of life. But for the Robinson family, it was just another stage for my mother Patricia to audition for a reality show that did not exist. I arrived early carrying a large white box. Inside was a 3-layer lemon pound cake glazed with real vanilla bean icing. It was not just a cake. It was my grandmother Big Mama's secret recipe. When I was a little girl, my father used to sneak into the kitchen at midnight to eat slices of this exact cake with me. It was our secret bond before money became the only language spoken in this house. I had spent 6 hours baking it, hoping that the taste would remind him of the father he used to be. I placed the cake gently in the center of the dining table. My mother walked in her heels, clicking sharply against the marble floor. She looked at the cake and then at me. Her nose wrinkled slightly. She asked if I made that myself. I smiled and said yes. Dad loves lemon pound cake. She sighed loud enough for the neighbors to hear, and muttered that she hoped I used premium flour, because she did not want guests choking on discount ingredients. Then the front door swung open. Darnell walked in wearing a suit that cost more than my car, followed by his wife Courtney. Courtney is a woman who smiles with her mouth, but never with her eyes. She scanned the room and her gaze landed on my cake. She walked over and tilted her head like she was inspecting a science fair project made by a toddler. Courtney let out a soft laugh and said, "Oh, Zara, that is so sweet. It looks so rustic and homemade. I admire how you are not embarrassed to bring something from your own kitchen. Most people would have just catered, but you are so brave to stick to your budget." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I said nothing. Darnell clapped his hands and announced that the real party could start now. He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table right next to my cake. Dad walked in beaming at Darnell. He did not even look at me. He reached for the velvet box. His hands shook as he opened it to reveal a gold Rolex Submariner. The gold gleamed under the chandelier light. My mother gasped and clapped her hands, screaming that this was a gift fit for a king. Darnell smirked and said, "Happy birthday, Dad. That is what success looks like." My father took the watch out and put it on his wrist, admiring the weight of it. Then he looked at the table. The watch box was crowding the centerpiece. Without thinking, without even looking up, my father extended his hand and shoved my cake box to the side. He pushed it so hard that it slid across the polished wood and hung precariously off the edge of the table. He did not catch it. I did. I lunged forward to stop my hard work from hitting the floor. My father did not notice. He was too busy holding his wrist up to the light, showing Courtney how the diamonds sparkled. Courtney looked at me holding the cake at the edge of the table and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe we should move the food to the kitchen, Zara. We want the table to look elegant for the photos, and that cardboard box is ruining the aesthetic." My mother agreed immediately. She told me to take the cake to the back because nobody eats carbs after 7 anyway. I stood there holding the cake that represented 6 hours of love and watching my father worship a watch that represented a debt Darnell definitely could not afford. That was the moment the little girl who loved her daddy finally died. I carried the cake to the kitchen and I dumped it straight into the trash can. The sound of the heavy cake hitting the bottom of the bin was the only closure I needed. They wanted gold. Fine. I would leave them with their gold and take my dignity with me. I did not scream. I did not flip the dining table. I simply turned my back on the trash can that held my lemon cake and walked toward the grand staircase. The silence in the dining room was heavy, but I could feel my mother's eyes burning into my back. As I reached the first landing, I heard the sharp click of her heels following me. She did not catch up to me until I was throwing my few belongings into a worn duffel bag in the guest room. She stood in the doorway blocking the exit with her arms crossed over her chest. Her face was not filled with worry or sadness. It was twisted with annoyance. "You are being dramatic, Zara," she hissed. "We are having a celebration for your father, and you are throwing a tantrum because nobody ate your little cake. Go downstairs and apologize to Darnell and Courtney." I zipped up the bag. The sound was loud in the quiet room. I looked her in the eye and said no. I am going home. My mother let out a cold, harsh laugh. "Home? You mean that roach-infested apartment you rent? You are choosing that over this mansion. Fine. Go. But listen to me clearly. If you walk out that front door tonight, do not bother coming back. I am calling the family lawyer tomorrow morning. I am writing you out of the will completely. You will not get a single dime of the Robinson inheritance." I looked at her, and I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not fear, it was amusement. She was threatening to cut me off from a fortune that was a fraction of what I made in a single quarter. She thought she was holding the keys to my survival, but she was holding an empty leash. I picked up my bag and walked past her. "Keep the money, Mother," I said softly. "You are going to need it more than I do." I walked down the stairs past the dining room where Darnell was loudly recounting a story about a business deal that I knew for a fact he had exaggerated. My father did not even look up from his watch as I opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the night air. The driveway was filled with luxury cars. My beat-up 2010 Honda Civic sat in the corner like an unwanted stain on the pavement. I threw my bag into the passenger seat and climbed in. The engine sputtered and coughed as I turned the key, but to me it sounded like a choir of angels. As I backed out of the driveway, I looked at the house one last time. It looked like a fortress of gold and misery. I was leaving empty-handed, but I had never felt richer. Once I was on the highway and the house was just a speck in my rearview mirror, my posture changed. The shoulders that had been hunched in defeat straightened. I reached into my bag and pulled out a sleek, encrypted smartphone that my family had never seen. I pressed the speed dial for my executive assistant, Elena. She answered on the first ring. "Good evening, Ms. Robinson. Elena, is the schedule for tomorrow finalized?" My voice was no longer the soft-spoken daughter. It was the voice of a CEO. "Yes, ma'am," Elena replied efficiently. "The meeting with the governor regarding the education reform bill is set for 9 a.m. The board of directors is ready for the quarterly review at noon. And your financial manager wants to confirm the acquisition of the downtown block." "Good," I said, watching the city lights blur past me. "Confirm everything. And Elena, please remind the legal team to update my beneficiary status. I have made some changes regarding my family." I hung up the phone and merged onto the expressway toward my penthouse. My mother thought she had just cut off a dead limb from the family tree. She had no idea she had just severed ties with the root that was keeping them all standing. I was done playing the victim. Tomorrow, the teacher takes off her disguise. For the next 12 months, I perfected the art of being invisible. Every morning at 6 a.m., I pulled my hair back into a messy bun and put on a beige cardigan I bought at a secondhand store. I drove my dented Honda Civic past the gated communities of the suburbs, deep into the south side of Chicago. The Haven Learning Center was a dilapidated brick building with peeling paint and a leaky roof. But to the 20 autistic children inside it was a sanctuary. My mother thought I was wasting my life wiping noses. She was wrong. I was building bridges for minds that society had thrown away. My favorite student was a 7-year-old boy named Leo. He was nonverbal and prone to violent outbursts when overstimulated. Other teachers had given up on him, calling him a lost cause. But I sat with him every single day, helping him navigate a world that was too loud for his senses. To the parents in that neighborhood, I was just Ms. Zara, the kind woman who probably clipped coupons to pay her rent. They brought me homemade tamales and knit scarves out of pity and gratitude. They had no idea that the woman teaching their children how to hold a pencil was effectively their landlord. But when the bell rang at 3 p.m., the struggling teacher vanished. I would drive back to my secure underground garage and take the private elevator up to the 45th floor. The beige cardigan went into the hamper. The messy bun was released into sleek waves. I stepped into a tailored Armani suit that cost more than my reported annual teaching salary. By 7 p.m., I was sitting in my home office surrounded by 3 monitors displaying real-time market data. I logged onto encrypted video calls, not with parents complaining about lunch menus, but with state senators and tech billionaires. In this world, I was not Ms. Zara. I was ZR, the phantom consultant behind the city's biggest urban development projects. I remember one specific Zoom call with Senator Hayes. He was sweating as he pitched a new zoning law to me, hoping for my endorsement. He said, "Ms. Robinson, if we get your backing on this, the governor will sign it by Friday. We need your capital to move forward." I took a sip of sparkling water and told him to rewrite Clause 4 because it disadvantaged low-income families. He did it immediately without question. It was almost comical. My brother Darnell had a poster of Senator Hayes in his office and dreamed of shaking his hand. Meanwhile, that same senator was terrified of disappointing me. My family saw a failure. The world saw a power broker. And keeping those two realities separate was my greatest entertainment until the invitation arrived. Peace is addictive but fragile. For exactly 365 days, I enjoyed the silence. No passive-aggressive texts, no backhanded compliments about my weight or my career. Just the steady rhythm of building my empire by night and shaping young minds by day. I almost allowed myself to believe they had forgotten me. I should have known better. Narcissists do not forget their victims. They just wait for a new audience before dragging them back on stage. The truce ended on a Tuesday afternoon. I was grading spelling tests when the school secretary walked in, holding a cream-colored envelope that looked ridiculous against the peeling paint of my classroom. It was heavy cardstock, embossed with gold leaf and sealed with actual wax. It smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. The secretary looked at me with wide eyes and asked if I was in trouble. I laughed and told her it was just family. I opened it carefully. It was an invitation to the wedding of my cousin Jasmine. Jasmine was a sweet girl who had unfortunately inherited her mother's need for validation. The wedding was set to take place at the Chateau Elan Winery and Resort, a venue that cost more for a single weekend than most of my students' parents made in 5 years. Before I could even toss the invitation into the recycling bin, my personal phone buzzed. It was a number I did not recognize. I usually ignored unknown callers, but something told me to check the message. The text read, "I had my assistant send the invitation to your little school because I assume you are still living in some basement apartment, and I did not want the invite returned to sender. Come to the wedding. Do not bring a guest. We do not want you embarrassing us with some mechanic or waiter. Come and take notes on what a successful life looks like. Maybe you will learn something." It was signed simply, Mother. I stared at the screen. The old Zara would have felt that familiar sting of shame. The old Zara would have deleted the message and cried in the bathroom. But I was not the old Zara. I sat back in my creaky teacher chair and analyzed the text like a business contract. She did not invite me because she missed me. She invited me because a hierarchy needs a bottom rung to make the top look higher. They needed the poor failure of a teacher to stand in the corner so their success would shine brighter by comparison. They wanted a scapegoat. I picked up the phone and dialed Elena. "Cancel my meetings for this weekend," I said. "I have a family engagement." Elena sounded surprised and asked if I wanted the driver to prep the Rolls-Royce. "No," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "Leave the luxury cars in the garage. I need to rent something humble, something that screams struggling civil servant." And Elena find that old dress I wore to the charity gala 3 years ago, the one with the loose hem. If they wanted a poor, helpless relative to look down on, I would give them the performance of a lifetime. I was going to that wedding, not to make amends, not to fight. I was going to watch them dig their own graves, and I wanted a front row seat when they finally fell in. The gravel driveway of Chateau Elan crunched loudly under the tires of the beige Toyota Camry I had rented from a budget lot near the airport. It was the perfect prop for the role of the destitute sister. As I pulled up to the grand entrance, the head valet frowned. He was used to parking Bentleys and Rolls-Royces, not sedans with fading paint and a missing hubcap. I stepped out, smoothing down the fabric of a dress that was 3 seasons out of fashion. I tipped the valet a crisp $100 bill folded discreetly inside a dollar bill and told him to keep the car close but out of sight. He nodded, catching the glimpse of Benjamin Franklin and understanding that things were not as they appeared. Before I could even reach the stairs, the aggressive roar of an engine shattered the peaceful vineyard atmosphere. A lime-green Lamborghini Huracan swerved into the driveway behind my rental, revving its engine unnecessarily. It was loud, obnoxious, and desperately screaming for attention. Naturally, it was Darnell. My brother stepped out of the low sports car, adjusting the lapels of a tuxedo that was a size too tight around the shoulders. He took off his sunglasses, dramatically scanning the crowd to make sure everyone was watching him. Courtney slid out of the passenger seat, looking like she had been dipped in gold sequins. When Darnell saw me standing near the valet stand, a smirk twisted his face. He did not see a sister. He saw an opportunity to assert dominance in front of an audience. "Well, look who actually showed up," Darnell announced loud enough for the arriving guests to hear. "I honestly thought you would not have the gas money to make the drive, Zara. I was about to Venmo you a bus fare." I kept my expression neutral, ignoring the snickers from Courtney's friends who had just pulled up in an Uber Black. "Hello, Darnell. Hello, Courtney." Darnell looked at the busy valets who were currently overwhelmed with other guests. He scoffed and looked back at me with disdain. "Since you are standing there doing nothing, why don't you make yourself useful? You are used to serving people right. That is basically what teachers do. Be a good girl and handle this for me." Without warning, he tossed his heavy key fob through the air toward me. "Park this for me, Zara. And be careful. The insurance deductible on this rental is more than your annual salary. Do not scratch it." Reflex took over, and I caught the keys in my right hand. The metal felt cold against my palm. Courtney giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand, waiting for me to bow my head and scurry off to the parking lot, like the help they believed I was. I looked at the keys. Then I looked at Darnell. I smiled. It was a slow, genuine smile that should have warned him. "I am not working today, Darnell," I said softly. Then I pulled my arm back and launched the keys in a high arc over the stone railing. They sailed through the air, glinting in the sunlight, before landing with a soft thud deep into the dense, thorny rose bushes that lined the landscaping on the far side of the entrance. Darnell's jaw dropped. Courtney let out a sharp shriek. I dusted off my hands calmly. "You might want to go find those before the landscaping crew turns on the sprinklers in 10 minutes. I hear water damage on a Lamborghini is quite expensive." I turned on my heel and walked up the grand staircase, leaving my brother scrambling into the dirt in his tight tuxedo, cursing my name while the valet tried to hide his laughter. The show had officially begun. The ballroom of Chateau Elan was a suffocating mix of expensive perfume and pretentious jazz music. I navigated through the sea of pastel silk dresses and tuxedoed waiters trying to find a quiet corner. I wanted to observe the dynamics, not become the center of attention. But Courtney had a radar for humiliation, and I was the biggest blip on her screen. She spotted me near the ice sculpture. She whispered something to her entourage of 3 bridesmaids who were all dressed in identical shimmering gold gowns that looked tight enough to cut off their circulation. They giggled in unison and turned their heads toward me. It was a coordinated attack. Courtney led the charge, holding a large glass of dark red Cabernet in her hand. Her walk was unsteady, not from alcohol, but from the sheer weight of her ego. "Zara," she exclaimed, her voice pitching up an octave to ensure maximum audience participation. "I am so surprised you actually came inside. I thought you would be more comfortable waiting in the parking lot with the other drivers." Her friends covered their mouths to hide their snickers. I stood my ground, clutching my small, worn clutch. "Hello, Courtney. It is a lovely ceremony." Courtney looked me up and down. Her eyes lingered on the hem of my beige dress, which I had specifically chosen because it was 5 years old and fraying slightly at the stitching. She tilted her head with mock sympathy. "Oh, honey, look at you. Is this the same dress you wore to Auntie Sarah's funeral? I love how you recycle. It is so eco-friendly. Or did you find it at the Goodwill bin on your way here? I know teachers' salaries are tragic, but I could have lent you one of my old tablecloths. It would have looked more expensive than this." The bridesmaids erupted into laughter. I opened my mouth to respond, to tell her that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, but I never got the chance. Courtney took a step forward, and suddenly her heel caught on absolutely nothing. It was a theatrical stumble worthy of an Oscar. Her arm jerked forward, and the entire contents of her wine glass launched directly at my midsection. The cold liquid splashed across my chest and waist, soaking into the light beige fabric instantly. It looked like a gunshot wound. The dark red stain spread aggressively, dripping down to my shoes. The music seemed to stop. Guests turned to stare. Courtney gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in a performance of shock that convinced no one. "Oh my God, Zara, I am so clumsy. I am so sorry. But honestly, maybe it is an improvement. At least now the dress has some color." Her friends could not hold it in anymore. They laughed openly. My mother was watching from a nearby table, sipping her champagne with a satisfied smirk. She did not move to help. She just watched her daughter-in-law humiliate her daughter. I did not gasp. I did not cry. I did not run to the bathroom to sob over the sink. I stood perfectly still, letting the wine drip onto the floor. I signaled a passing waiter with a subtle nod. He stopped, immediately drawn in by an authority I could not quite hide. I took a linen napkin from his tray. I calmly blotted the excess wine from my dress. My movements were slow and deliberate. I did not frantically rub the fabric like a panicked child. I cleaned myself with the dignity of a queen, wiping away a speck of dust. I looked up and met Courtney's eyes. Her smile faltered slightly. She expected tears. She expected a scene. Instead, she got silence. "It is quite all right, Courtney," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It is just wine. Stains wash out eventually. It is a shame that bad manners and a cruel heart are permanent conditions." I dropped the stained napkin onto her gold-sequined shoe and walked past her. The laughter died in their throats. For a second they looked confused, as if they realized the poor teacher had just dismissed them like unruly students. I headed to the restroom, not to hide but to prepare for the next round. They thought they had broken me. They had only sharpened my resolve. I stepped out of the restroom with a damp spot on my dress, but my head held high. I walked over to the massive seating chart displayed on an easel near the entrance. It was a map of social hierarchy, intricately designed to show everyone exactly where they stood in the family food chain. Tables 1 through 5 were near the dance floor, draped in silk and adorned with towering arrangements of white orchids. That was where Darnell, Courtney, and my parents were seated. I scanned the list for my name. I was not at the family table. I was not even at the extended family table. I finally found Zara Robinson printed in small font at the very bottom of the list assigned to table 19. I navigated through the ballroom, walking past the laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses. The further I walked, the less glamorous the room became. Table 19 was located in the far back corner, directly next to the swinging double doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter burst through with a tray of steaming food, a blast of hot air and the smell of industrial dish soap hit the table. There were no orchids here. The centerpiece was a small wilting carnation in a glass cup. The tablecloth had a small burn mark on the edge. My dinner companions were not aunts or cousins. To my left sat the frantic nanny employed by the groom's sister, who was trying to hush a crying toddler. To my right sat the limousine driver, who looked uncomfortable in his uniform. This was the penalty box. This was where they put the people they wanted to hide. I pulled out my metal chair, which scraped loudly against the floor, and sat down. The nanny gave me an apologetic smile. I returned it warmly. I felt more comfortable sitting next to a hard-working woman than I ever would have felt sitting next to Courtney. Suddenly, a shadow fell over the table. I did not have to look up to know who it was. The scent of Chanel No. 5 was unmistakable. My mother stood behind me. She did not make a scene. She leaned down close to my ear, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that sent a chill down my spine. "Do not look so sour, Zara," she hissed quietly. "This is exactly where you belong. Look around you. These are your peers, service workers and hired help. It matches your tax bracket perfectly." She placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing it hard enough to bruise. "Listen to me closely. When the photographers start taking pictures of the family, do not dare come up to the front. Stay here in the shadows. We do not want you ruining the aesthetic of the wedding album with your poverty. Enjoy your meal. I hear the chicken is edible if you are hungry enough. She patted my shoulder twice like one would pat a disobedient dog and straightened up. She adjusted her diamond necklace and glided back toward the VIP section without looking back. I watched her go. She thought she had put me in a prison of shame. She thought sitting me next to the kitchen was a punishment. She had no idea that from this angle I had the perfect view of the entire room. I poured myself a glass of water and took a sip. Let them have their orchids and their arrogance. I was just biding my time. The view from the bottom was about to get very interesting. The room fell silent as the DJ announced the next toaster. It was Darnell, of course. He strutted onto the small stage, grabbing the microphone with the confidence of a man who believed his own hype. The spotlight hit his sequins, making him look like a disco ball that had gained sentience. He did not look at the bride and groom. He looked at the audience, ensuring all eyes were fixed on him before he began to speak. Jasmine and Marcus, he started, his voice booming through the speakers. When I looked at your wedding registry, I saw a lot of blenders and towels. And frankly, that bored me. You know me. I do not do small. I do not do average. I build empires. He paused for dramatic effect, waiting for the applause that my mother started leading enthusiastically from table 1. Darnell reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a large rolled parchment tied with a gold ribbon. So, instead of a toaster, I am giving you a piece of the future. This is a certificate for 5,000 shares in Robinson Capital Global. Right now, the market value is projected to hit $50,000 by next quarter. Welcome to the 1% family. The room erupted. Guests gasped and whispered to each other about Darnell's incredible generosity. Jasmine looked overwhelmed, clutching the piece of paper as if it were a winning lottery ticket. I sat at table 19, sipping my water and suppressing a laugh. I knew Robinson Capital Global was currently under investigation by the SEC for inflating assets, and those shares were worth less than the paper they were printed on. But to everyone else, Darnell was a god. As Darnell walked off the stage, basking in the adoration, my mother suddenly stood up. She snatched the microphone from the MC before he could announce the cake cutting. Her eyes scanned the room until they locked onto me in the back corner. A cruel smile played on her lips. "Wait, everyone," she announced, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We have one more sibling who needs to present her gift. Zara, honey, stand up. Come on down here." I froze. This was not part of the schedule. This was an ambush. My mother continued. "I know you could not afford much on a teacher's salary, especially after paying for that rental car, but it is the thought that counts, right? Come show everyone what you brought. Do not be shy. We all know you did your best." The room turned to look at me. The silence was heavy and suffocating. She was setting me up. She wanted to create a visual contrast. Darnell the tycoon with his stocks versus Zara, the failure with her pitiful envelope. She wanted to humiliate me publicly to validate her narrative that I was nothing without them. I slowly stood up from my seat near the kitchen doors. I could feel the heat rising in my neck, but I forced my face to remain impassive. I clutched the plain white envelope in my hand. It looked thin. It looked cheap. Exactly what she expected. I walked through the tables, the sound of my heels echoing in the quiet room. I could hear the whispers. Poor thing. It must be hard being the disappointment of the family. I stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding. Darnell was standing to the side, arms crossed, smirking, waiting for the punchline. My mother looked at me with eyes that said, "Go ahead, embarrass yourself." I took the microphone. I did not make a speech about empires. I did not talk about myself. I simply looked at Jasmine and Marcus. "I hope you find happiness," I said softly. I handed the envelope to Jasmine. She took it hesitantly, looking at my mother for permission to open it. My mother nodded eagerly, anticipating a check for $50 or maybe a gift card to a discount store. Jasmine slid her finger under the flap and pulled out the contents. The room leaned in, waiting for the joke to land. They had no idea the punchline was going to hit them right in the wallet. Jasmine stared at the contents of the envelope. Her hands began to tremble. First, she pulled out a glossy brochure featuring a 5-star overwater bungalow in the Maldives with the words, "All expenses paid trip," printed in gold foil across the front. Then she pulled out the cashier's check. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the glasses. Jasmine blinked rapidly, trying to process the numbers written on the check. She leaned closer to the microphone, and her whisper echoed through the ballroom speakers like a shout. $20,000. A collective gasp swept through the room. Darnell's smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of confusion and panic. He took a step forward, reaching out to grab the check, but my mother was faster. Patricia snatched the paper from Jasmine's hands with the speed of a viper striking its prey. She held the check up to the light, scrutinizing it. I watched her face shift from shock to calculation, and finally to rage. She could not accept that her failure daughter had just outshined her golden son. It destroyed her narrative, so she decided to rewrite reality on the spot. She laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound that made people flinch. "Oh, Zara, really? You have truly outdone yourself this time." She turned to the confused guests, waving the check in the air like a piece of evidence. "Everyone, please forgive my daughter. She has always had a vivid imagination. This is clearly a fake check, a prop, probably printed off the internet to make herself feel important for 5 minutes." I stood calmly on the stage watching her performance. "It is a certified cashier's check, Mother," I said, my voice steady. "You can call the bank to verify the funds right now." She cut me off, her voice rising to a shriek. "Do not lie to me. You are a teacher. You make $40,000 a year. Where would you get $20,000 plus a vacation package? Did you steal it? Did you take out a predatory loan just to show off? Or are you doing something illegal on the side?" She turned to Jasmine and shoved the brochure back into the envelope. "We do not accept dirty money, Jasmine. And we certainly do not accept counterfeit checks. This is an insult to your intelligence." With a look of pure disgust, my mother crumpled the check in her fist. She threw it at me. The ball of paper hit my chest and bounced off, landing on the scuffed stage floor near my feet. "Take your trash and get off the stage, Zara," she spat. "Go back to your table before I have security remove you for fraud." Darnell let out a nervous laugh, trying to salvage the mood. "Yeah, nice try, Zara. Almost had us there for a second. Good prank." The guests chuckled nervously, unsure of what was real, but willing to believe the wealthy mother over the poorly dressed daughter. I looked down at the crumpled ball of paper. That check represented a year of mortgage payments for a normal family. It represented freedom. And she had thrown it away because her ego could not handle the truth. I slowly bent down. The room watched in silence. I picked up the check and smoothed it out against my palm. I picked up the brochure. I placed them both neatly back into the envelope. "Suit yourself," I said into the microphone. I turned to look directly at my mother, who was glaring at me with triumph in her eyes. "I guess the Phoenix Foundation will appreciate the donation instead. They help children who are actually neglected by their families. It seems fitting." I slipped the envelope into my purse and walked off the stage. I did not look back at Jasmine, who was looking at me with a mixture of confusion and regret. I walked straight back to table 19. My heart was pounding, not from fear but from adrenaline. They had just rejected the last lifeline I would ever offer them. The bridge was burned. Now I could watch them drown without feeling a shred of guilt. 2 weeks after the wedding fiasco, I was back in my sanctuary. The Haven Learning Center was peaceful until a glossy black Range Rover mounted the curb outside, crushing a flower bed my students had planted just yesterday. I watched through the classroom window as my brother Darnell stepped out. He was wearing a suit that cost more than the annual budget of the entire school. He looked at the neighborhood with open disgust, covering his nose as if the very air of the South Side was toxic to his delicate lungs. Darnell did not knock. He never knocked. He pushed open the door to my classroom, interrupting a sensory play session with 6 autistic children. The noise of the door slamming startled Leo, who immediately dropped his toy and covered his ears. I signaled for my assistant to take the children to the quiet room. Once they were gone, I turned to my brother. "Get out, Darnell," I said, keeping my voice low. "You are disrupting my class." He laughed, waving his hand dismissively at the empty chairs. "Oh, please, Zara. Nobody cares about finger painting. We have real business to discuss. And for once in your life, you might actually be useful to me." He walked over to my desk and unrolled a massive glossy blueprint. It curled at the edges, knocking over a jar of pencils. He did not apologize. He just tapped a manicured finger on the center of the drawing. "Look at this, Zara. This is Project Skyline. It is my masterpiece. We are going to bulldoze this entire 3-block radius. All these crumbling houses, all these liquor stores, and yes, even this pathetic excuse for a school. Gone. We are replacing it with high-end luxury lofts, a Whole Foods on the corner, a boutique gym. We are going to gentrify this place so hard that the property taxes alone will force the trash out within 6 months." I looked at the map. His finger was resting directly on the location of my school. He was talking about evicting 300 low-income families. He was talking about destroying the only safe space these special needs children had. "You want to destroy their homes?" I asked, my blood running cold. "Where are they supposed to go?" Darnell shrugged, adjusting his silk tie. "Not my problem. They can move to the suburbs or shelters." "Who cares? This is prime real estate, Zara. We are talking about a $40 million profit margin. But there is one snag." He pointed to the school building on the map. "This building. The deed is held by some anonymous trust called the Phoenix Foundation. The principal of this school refuses to meet with my lawyers. She keeps rejecting our offers. Since you work here and you are likely desperate for cash, I figured you could facilitate a meeting." He leaned in closer, his cologne overpowering the smell of crayons and chalk. "Get your boss to sign the sale papers, Zara. Tell her we will offer a fair price. If you get her to sign, I will give you a finder's fee. $5,000. That is like 3 months of your salary, right? Think about it. You could buy a car that actually starts." He looked around the room with a sneer. "Besides, why are you defending this place? Look at it. It is a breeding ground for failure. You are wasting your time trying to fix broken kids. Let me bulldoze it and build something beautiful." I looked at my brother and saw a monster. He did not see human beings. He saw obstacles to his bank account. He wanted me to help him destroy the very thing I had built to protect the vulnerable. He had no idea that he was not asking a lowly teacher for a favor. He was declaring war on the secret owner of the very land he was standing on. The sanctuary of my classroom was violated exactly 24 hours later. I was in the middle of a sensory integration session, helping a nonverbal student named Maya stack colorful wooden blocks. The room was quiet and peaceful until the heavy metal door slammed open against the wall with a deafening crash. Maya jumped and immediately curled into a ball, covering her ears. I spun around, ready to protect my students from an intruder, but it was not a stranger. It was Darnell, and this time he had brought Courtney. Courtney stepped into the room as if she were entering a toxic waste facility. She held a silk handkerchief firmly over her nose and mouth, her eyes wide with exaggerated horror. She wore pristine white pants and 6-inch heels that clicked aggressively on the linoleum floor. She looked around at the peeling paint, the mismatched chairs, and the children who were staring at her in fear. "Oh my God, Darnell," she muffled through her handkerchief. "You did not tell me it smelled like old milk and failure in here. How can you breathe? It feels like the poverty is literally sticking to my skin." I stood up slowly, placing a calming hand on Maya's back. I walked toward them, stopping 3 feet away, to create a physical barrier between my students and their toxicity. "You need to leave," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You are terrifying the children. This is a safe space and you are violating it." Courtney laughed, a shrill sound that grated against the nerves. "Safe space, please. This looks like a holding cell for lost causes." She pointed a manicured finger at Leo, who was rocking back and forth in the corner soothing himself. Look at that one. Why is he doing that? It is disturbing. Does he not know how to sit still like a normal person? My blood boiled. Leo was brilliant. He processed the world differently, and his rocking was his way of coping with overstimulation. Courtney saw a defect. I saw a child doing his best. Do not talk about him, I snapped. He understands everything you are saying. Get out, now. Darnell stepped forward, looking annoyed that I was not rolling out the red carpet. Relax, Zara. Courtney is just sensitive to low-budget environments. We are here to save you from this squalor. We brought the contract for the principal. Where is she? I crossed my arms. She is not interested, and neither am I. Courtney rolled her eyes and took a step toward the art drying rack. She reached out and poked a wet watercolor painting with the tip of her long fingernail. It was a painting Maya had worked on for 3 days. Ugh, she sneered, wiping a speck of blue paint off her nail. Even the art is depressing. Why do you bother Zara? These kids are never going to be anything. You are wasting your life babysitting broken merchandise. Something inside me snapped. It was not the insults to me. I could handle those. But calling these innocent children broken merchandise was a line she should never have crossed. I took a step forward, invading her personal space. The air crackled with tension. Get your hand off that painting, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. These children have more courage in their little fingers than you have in your entire empty body. If you do not walk out that door in 10 seconds, I am calling the police, and I will have you arrested for trespassing and harassment. And do not think I won't do it just because we share a last name. Courtney looked at Darnell, her eyes flashing with indignation. Are you going to let her talk to me like that? She is threatening us. Darnell sighed, checking his watch. She is just emotional, Courtney. It is the stress of being poor. Let's just get to the point. Zara, we are not leaving until you understand what is at stake here. He reached into his jacket pocket. He was not reaching for a weapon. He was reaching for something he thought was far more powerful. He was reaching for his wallet. He thought he could buy my dignity. He was about to find out that some things are not for sale. Darnell did not pull out a checkbook. He reached into the inner pocket of his Italian suit jacket and withdrew a thick cream-colored envelope. He tossed it onto my desk with a careless flick of his wrist. It landed with a heavy thud right on top of Maya's watercolor painting, sliding across the surface until it stopped just inches from my hand. The flap was unsealed, revealing a dense stack of crisp $100 bills. He leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the desk, invading my personal space. $5,000, Zara. Cash. Untraceable. I did the math. Based on the public records for special education teachers in this district, this is roughly equivalent to 3 months of your take-home pay. Maybe even 4 if you are as bad at negotiating your salary as you are at life. Courtney chimed in from behind him, her voice dripping with condescension. Just take it, Zara. Do not let your pride make you starve. You can finally buy a pair of shoes that were not made in a sweatshop. Or maybe get your teeth whitened. Consider it a humanitarian aid package from the Robinson family to its developing nation member. I looked down at the money. To them, it was a life-changing sum. To me, it was less than what I spent on a single dinner with the school board last week to secure the permits for our new sensory gym. But they did not see a philanthropist sitting across from them. They saw a beggar who should be grateful for scraps. I slowly lifted my gaze from the cash to Darnell's face. His eyes were gleaming with the arrogance of a man who believed every soul had a price tag. You want me to convince Principal Henderson to sell this building? I said, my voice flat and emotionless. You want me to look 300 families in the eye and tell them they have 30 days to find a new school in a district that is already overcrowded and underfunded. You want me to help you evict children who have nowhere else to go. Darnell rolled his eyes, checking his watch as if my moral hesitation was wasting his valuable time. Do not be dramatic, Zara. It is just real estate. The building is falling apart anyway. We are doing the city a favor. Once we build the luxury condos, the property values will skyrocket. The crime rate will drop. We are cleaning up the neighborhood. You should be thanking me for improving your workplace environment. I reached out and placed my index finger on the envelope. I did not pick it up. I simply pushed it slowly back across the desk toward him. You are not cleaning up the neighborhood, Darnell. You are erasing it. I looked him dead in the eye. You are valuing the stability and future of these innocent children at $5,000. Is that really how cheap you think my integrity is? Or is that just how little you value human beings who do not possess a trust fund? Darnell's face hardened. The playful smirk vanished, replaced by a cold sneer. He snatched the envelope back off the desk and shoved it violently into his pocket. You are playing a dangerous game, Zara. You think you are being noble, but you are just being stupid. I offered you a lifeboat. Now you are going to drown with the rest of the rats. We do not need your help to get this building. We have city inspectors on our payroll. We have lawyers who can find code violations that do not even exist. This building will be condemned by the end of the month, whether you take the money or not. I tried to be the nice brother. Now I am going to be the businessman. Watch your back, Zara. When the wrecking ball comes, do not say I did not warn you. The heavy metal door clicked shut behind Darnell and the silence rushed back into the classroom. For a full minute, I did not move. I listened to the sound of his Italian leather shoes fading down the hallway. I waited until the roar of his Range Rover faded into the distance before I allowed my posture to shift. The terrified teacher vanished. In her place sat the woman who had made Forbes' 30 Under 30 list under a pseudonym. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk. Underneath a stack of construction paper and dried-out glue sticks, there was a small biometric safe bolted to the floor. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. It beeped softly and popped open. Inside lay a single leather-bound file. I pulled it out and opened it on the desk, right where Darnell had thrown his insulting $5,000 bribe. The document on top was the original deed to the building. Darnell thought he was fighting a stubborn principal named Mrs. Henderson. He thought he was up against a failing school board. He had no idea that the Phoenix Foundation was not some faceless corporate entity. It was me. I picked up my encrypted phone and dialed a number that was saved simply as legal. It rang once before a deep voice answered. "Good afternoon, Ms. Robinson." "Hello, James," I said, my voice dropping the soft teacher cadence and adopting the sharp precision of a CEO. "My brother just left the building. He is moving forward with the eviction threats. He attempted to bribe me to influence the sale." On the other end of the line, my attorney sighed. "I am sorry you had to deal with that. Do you want us to file a harassment suit?" "No," I said, leaning back in my squeaky chair. "Not yet. I want him to feel confident. I want him to overextend himself. Darnell is leverage-heavy right now. I saw his quarterly reports. If he does not secure this land for his luxury project, his investors will pull out. He is desperate, and desperate men make mistakes." I looked around my classroom. 5 years ago, when the city threatened to condemn this building, I bought the entire block anonymously. I used the profits from my first major tech exit to secure the deed. I named it the Phoenix Foundation because I wanted these children to rise from the ashes of a system that had failed them. I was not just their teacher. I was their landlord, their protector, and their biggest investor. Darnell offered me $5,000 to sell out my own property. The irony was almost delicious. The land alone was appraised at $4.2 million last month. "James, listen to me," I continued. "I want you to reject every offer he sends. Do not give a reason. Just say the owner is not interested. Make him frantic. Make him dig for dirt that does not exist. And James, make sure the city inspectors know that if they accept a bribe from him, I will have their badges on my desk by morning." "Understood, Ms. Robinson," James replied. "And the recording." I glanced at the tiny camera lens hidden in the clock on the wall. The red light was not blinking, but it was recording. It captured everything. Every insult. Every threat. The bribe. "I have it," I said. "Keep the file open, James. We are going to need it soon." I hung up the phone and locked the deed back in the safe. I picked up a crayon that had rolled onto the floor. Darnell thought he was the shark in this tank. He had no idea he was swimming with a leviathan. He wanted to bulldoze my school. I was going to let him rev up his engines. I was going to let him bring the wrecking ball right to my front door. And then I was going to show him exactly who owns the ground he walks on. I waited until the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the classroom floor before I made the call. I needed the lighting to match the mood of defeat I was about to project. When Darnell answered, his tone was clipped and impatient, but I could hear the smug satisfaction underneath. I told him I had reconsidered. I told him I was scared of losing my job. I told him I needed the money. He arrived 20 minutes later. He did not storm in this time. He strolled in. He looked like a king surveying a kingdom he had just conquered without firing a single shot. He sat on the edge of my desk, swinging one leg back and forth casually. I sat in my chair, shoulders slumped, looking at my hands. I made sure my voice trembled just enough to be convincing. "I will talk to Principal Henderson," I whispered. "But Darnell, I am terrified. You said the building would be condemned regardless. How can you be so sure? If the inspection happens and the building passes, I will look like a fool, and I will still lose my job." Darnell laughed. It was a loud barking sound that echoed off the chalkboard. He leaned in closer, eager to educate his naive little sister on how the real world worked. His arrogance was his Achilles heel. He wanted to brag. He needed to brag. "Zara, look at me. Look at—" "There is no if. This inspection is a formality. I had lunch with Chief Inspector Miller yesterday. Do you know how much a city inspector makes? Not enough. A simple envelope with $10,000 clears up a lot of vision problems." I kept my head down, hiding the sharp glint in my eyes. "You paid him off." Darnell scoffed. "I facilitated a transaction. Miller is going to find black mold in the basement. He is going to find structural cracks in the foundation that make the building unsafe for habitation. He has already written the report, Zara. He is just waiting for my signal to file it. And as for the zoning permits, Senator Hayes is already on board. I promised him a nice photo op at the groundbreaking ceremony for his re-election campaign. The fix is in. This building is already dust. You are just helping us sweep it up." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the envelope of cash again. He dropped it onto my lap. "See? That wasn't so hard, was it? You are finally learning." "Money talks, Zara. Everything else is just noise." He stood up, smoothing out his suit jacket. "Get me that meeting with Henderson by tomorrow morning. I want this signed before the weekend." He patted me on the cheek, a condescending tap that made my skin crawl. Then he turned and walked out, whistling a tune. He thought he had just bought an accomplice. I waited until I heard his car engine fade away. Then I sat up straight. The slump vanished from my shoulders. The fear evaporated from my eyes. I reached for the small device hidden under a pile of grading papers. The red light was steady. I pressed stop and then play. Darnell's voice filled the empty room, loud and clear. A simple envelope with $10,000. "Miller is going to find black mold. Senator Hayes is already on board." It was perfect. He had not just admitted to bribery. He had implicated a city inspector and a sitting senator. He had handed me a loaded gun and placed his forehead right against the barrel. I picked up the $5,000 he had dropped in my lap. I would add this to the evidence pile too. Darnell wanted to play the businessman. Well, he just made the worst deal of his life. The call came at 2 a.m. It was not my mother. It was a nurse from St. Jude Medical Center telling me my father Otis had collapsed in the bathroom. Massive stroke. Get here now. I drove my battered Honda Civic to the emergency room entrance, running red lights in the empty city streets. When I burst into the waiting area, the scene was chaotic. My mother, Patricia, was not just crying, she was performing. She was draped over a plastic chair, wailing loud enough to be heard in the parking lot, clutching her chest as if she were the one dying. Courtney was standing next to her, checking her makeup in a compact mirror, looking bored, while Darnell paced back and forth, talking loudly on his phone about a merger that did not exist. I ran up to them. "Is he alive?" My mother looked up. Her mascara was running, but her eyes were cold. "Oh, look who decided to show up. We have been here for 20 minutes, Zara." "Where were you?" "Probably sleeping in that basement of yours while your father is fighting for his life." Before I could respond, a surgeon in blue scrubs walked out. He looked exhausted. The family froze. "Are you the Robinson family?" the doctor asked. "Yes." Darnell stepped forward, puffed up his chest. "I am Darnell Robinson. I am the patriarch now. Tell us the situation." The doctor ignored Darnell's posturing. "Your father has suffered a severe subarachnoid hemorrhage. A vessel burst in his brain. The pressure is building rapidly. If we do not operate within the next hour, he will either die or be left in a permanent vegetative state." My mother let out a fresh scream. "Save him then. What are you waiting for? Do your job." The doctor held up a hand. "We are ready to prep the OR, but there is a complication. Your father's insurance policy lapsed 2 months ago. The premium was not paid. And because this is an elective specialized neurosurgery involving an out-of-network team, the hospital administration requires a down payment before we can proceed." Darnell turned pale. "Lapsed. I told him to set up autopay." The hospital financial coordinator stepped forward holding a clipboard. "We need $150,000 immediately to clear the surgical team. We take credit cards or a verified wire transfer." The silence that followed was deafening. The wailing stopped. The pacing stopped. The air in the room grew heavy with the weight of their greed. 150,000, Patricia gasped. "That is extortion. Who has that kind of money sitting in a checking account? Can you not just bill us later? We are good for it. Look at my son's watch. Look at our clothes." The coordinator shook her head. "I am sorry, ma'am. Policy is strict for uninsured patients. We need the payment now, or we have to stabilize him and transfer him to a county facility. He likely will not survive the transport." My mother turned to Darnell. Her eyes were wide and desperate. "Darnell, pay them. Use the company card. Use your investment account. Just pay the man so they can save your father." Darnell took a step back. He looked at the floor. He looked at the wall. He looked anywhere but at his dying father down the hall. "Mom, you know I cannot do that right now," he stammered. "My liquidity is tied up in the Skyline project. If I pull 6 figures out right now, the SEC will flag the account. It takes 3 days to clear a wire. I do not have it on me." He was lying. I knew his accounts were empty because he had spent everything keeping up appearances. But my mother did not know that. She just saw her golden son hesitating. She turned to Courtney. "Courtney, ask your parents." Courtney recoiled, clutching her Chanel bag. "Absolutely not. My parents are on a cruise in the Mediterranean. I am not waking them up to ask for money for your husband. That is inappropriate." I stood there watching them. My father was bleeding into his brain down the hall, and his wife and golden children were arguing over their bank balances. They were not worried about losing him. They were worried about losing money. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They were going to let him die because they were too selfish to be broke and too broke to be rich. The hospital administrator looked at the clock on the wall. Her expression was not unkind, but it was firm. She tapped her pen against the clipboard, a rhythmic sound that echoed like a countdown in the sterile hallway. "Mr. Robinson, we are losing time," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "The neurosurgeon has another emergency case coming in via helicopter in 20 minutes. If we do not get the clearance code from the billing department before then, we lose the operating window. Your father goes to the back of the queue." My mother, Patricia, turned on Darnell like a cornered animal. Her face was flushed, her hands shaking. "Darnell, stop talking about the SEC. This is your father. Just write the check. Who cares if they flag the account? We will deal with the audit later. Just save him." Darnell wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. It was the only moisture on his face as his mouth was clearly dry with panic. He loosened his tie, looking trapped. "Mom, you do not understand how high finance works. It is not just a flag. It is a federal freeze. If I try to move that much capital on a weekend during a merger investigation, they will freeze all my assets. I could lose the company. I could lose everything. I cannot destroy my future just because Dad forgot to pay his premium. He was lying through his teeth. I could see it in the way his eyes darted around the room, avoiding direct contact. There was no merger. There was no investigation. There was just an empty bank account and a maxed-out credit card. Patricia let out a sob of frustration. She spun around to face Courtney, who was scrolling through Instagram on her phone, trying to look invisible. "Courtney, honey, listen to me." Patricia grabbed her daughter-in-law's hands. "You always brag about your family's oil money. You have your own trust fund. Just write the check. Darnell will pay you back double on Monday. I promise. Please, Courtney, for family." Courtney pulled her hands away as if my mother had a contagious disease. She took a step back, physically recoiling. "Patricia, please, do not put me in this position. My trust fund is managed by my father's estate lawyers in Connecticut. If I withdraw 6 figures for a non-blood relative without prior approval, they will freeze my allowance for a year. I have boundaries, Patricia. Besides, Darnell is the provider. This is his responsibility. I am just the wife. I am not the bank." My mother stood alone in the center of the hallway. Her husband was dying behind double doors. Her wealthy son was making excuses. Her wealthy daughter-in-law was indifferent. She looked around for someone to blame, someone to carry the weight of her anger. And there I was, standing quietly against the wall, observing their selfishness. She marched over to me. Her eyes were wild with grief and rage. She did not ask me for help because she assumed I had nothing to give. Instead, she needed a punching bag. She jabbed her finger into my chest, right over my heart. "Look at you," she spat, "standing there useless as always. If you had listened to me and married a banker instead of playing martyr in that ghetto school, you could save your father right now. But no, you had to be selfish. You had to follow your passion. Well, I hope your passion keeps you warm at night, because your poverty is killing my husband. You are worthless, Zara. Absolutely worthless. Get out of my sight." I looked at my mother. I looked at the tears streaming down her face that were caused not by love, but by the realization that her golden life was a lie. She called me worthless. She had no idea that the plastic card sitting in my pocket could buy this entire hospital wing. I backed away from the shouting match in the hallway. Patricia was still screaming about entitlement while Darnell was frantically tapping on his phone, pretending to look for funds that simply did not exist. They were so consumed by their own performance that they did not notice me slipping around the corner. I pulled the hood of my faded gray sweatshirt up over my head and adjusted my face mask until only my eyes were visible. To the casual observer, I looked like just another exhausted relative trying to hide their grief. But as I walked toward the administrative wing, I was not grieving. I was executing a transaction. I found the door marked Patient Financial Services tucked away behind the main reception desk. I pushed it open. The room smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. A young man with dark circles under his eyes sat behind a thick glass partition. His name tag read Kevin. His hand was hovering over the telephone receiver. He was about to make the call. He was about to tell the neurosurgeon to stand down because the Robinson family was insolvent. I walked up to the window and rapped my knuckles sharply against the glass. The sound startled him. He looked up, looking annoyed and exhausted. "I am sorry, ma'am," he said, sighing. "This office is closed to the public right now. If you are here for the Robinson case, unless you have a wire transfer confirmation number, I have to make this call. We are out of time." I did not say a word. I did not beg. I did not plead. I simply reached into the inner lining of my battered purse. My fingers brushed past the standard bank debit card I used to maintain my cover. I reached deeper until I felt the cold, unyielding surface of the card that unlocked the world. It was heavy, solid anodized titanium. I pulled it out. The black matte finish absorbed the harsh fluorescent lights of the office. I slid it through the small opening at the bottom of the glass partition. It did not make the cheap plastic scratch that credit cards usually make. When it hit the granite countertop, It made a distinct, heavy clack. It was a sharp, metallic sound, like a gold coin dropping onto a pavement. It was the sound of absolute, unadulterated power. Kevin looked down. He froze. He stared at the black metal card. He saw the Centurion logo. He saw the name Zara Robinson Laser etched in silver. He looked back up at me and his annoyance evaporated instantly, replaced by pure, unmasked shock. He knew what this card was. He knew that you could not apply for it. You had to be invited. And you only got invited if you spent more in a year than this hospital paid him in a decade. Run it, I said, my voice low and steady. $150,000, and add the VIP recovery suite package. I want the best nurses you have on rotation. He stammered, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for the heavy card. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely, ma'am. Do you need to call your bank for authorization? No, I replied, keeping my eyes locked on his. It will clear. Just run it. He swiped the heavy metal card. The terminal did not even pause to think. It beeped instantly. Approved. The printer whirred to life, spitting out a receipt for a fortune. He looked at the receipt, and then at me, holding the paper like it was a holy relic. Who should I list as the guarantor? Anonymous, I said, leaning in closer to the glass. You will tell the family that the funds were cleared by an anonymous donor. If my name appears anywhere on their paperwork, I will ensure you never work in finance again. Do we understand each other? He nodded, eyes wide. Crystal clear, Ms. Robinson. I took the card back, sliding it into my pocket. The metal was still cold. The entire transaction had taken less than 30 seconds. I turned and walked out, leaving the stunned clerk holding a receipt that saved a life. I slipped back into the hallway shadows just in time to see the nurse running toward my family, yelling that the surgery was a go. The surgery took 6 hours. I sat in the hard plastic chair in the general waiting room while my family occupied the private lounge I had paid for. When the double doors finally swung open and the surgeon gave the thumbs up, I did not rush forward. I stayed in the shadows. I watched them hug. I watched Courtney check her makeup now that the drama was over. I watched Darnell exhale a breath that smelled of unearned relief. I followed them quietly to the recovery room. I stood outside the large glass window looking in. My father looked small in the bed, hooked up to machines that beeped in a steady rhythm. He blinked, his eyes open groggily. The first face he saw was Darnell's. Dad, you made it, Darnell said, smoothing his hair. Otis whispered, asking how they paid because he knew the insurance had lapsed. This was the moment for truth, the moment for Darnell to admit he was broke and helpless. But my mother stepped in. She placed a hand on Darnell's shoulder and looked at my father with tears in her eyes. It was Darnell, honey, Patricia sobbed. He sold the Porsche. He called his broker and liquidated his portfolio while you were in surgery. He paid everything, $150,000 cash. He saved your life, Otis. I felt a physical sickness rise in my throat. I gripped the door handle, my knuckles turning white. I waited for Darnell to correct her. I waited for him to say, actually, Mom, I did not pay a dime. But Darnell just looked down at his shoes and then back at my father. He squeezed Otis's hand. It was the least I could do, Dad. Money is just paper. You are my father. I would sell everything I own to keep you here. Otis began to cry. He pulled Darnell into a weak embrace, his shaking hand patting Darnell's back. My son, he whispered. My good son. I knew I could count on you. Thank God for you, Darnell. Courtney stood in the corner, beaming, as if she had not just refused to help 2 hours ago. She chimed in, calling him a hero. I stood on the other side of the glass, holding the carbon copy of the receipt that bore my signature. The receipt that proved I was the one who saved him. The receipt that proved Darnell was a fraud. I could have walked in there. I could have thrown the paper on the bed and exposed their lies. I could have shamed them into silence. But as I watched my father look at Darnell with that look of absolute adoration, a look he had never given me, I realized something profound. They did not want the truth. They wanted the narrative. They wanted the golden child to save the day because it validated their choices. If I walked in there and told them the truth, they would hate me for destroying their fantasy. They would resent me for having the money they lacked. I slowly released the door handle. The anger that had been burning in my chest for years suddenly cooled into something hard and permanent like ice. I was done seeking their approval. I was done trying to buy their love. I had saved his life, that was my duty as a daughter. But allowing them to steal the credit, that was my gift to myself. It severed the final chord. I turned my back on the window. Let Darnell play the hero. Let him enjoy the applause. Because when the curtain falls and the bills come due for the rest of his life, I will not be there to bail him out again. "Goodbye, Dad," I whispered to the empty hallway. "You got your life back, but you just lost your daughter." I looked down at the thermal paper in my hand. It was a flimsy thing, barely weighing a gram, yet it carried the weight of $150,000. It was the only physical proof that I was the dutiful daughter. It was the only evidence that while Darnell was sweating over his empty bank accounts, I was the one who actually saved our father's life. For a fleeting moment, I considered marching into that recovery room. I imagined the look on my mother's face if I slapped this receipt onto her chest. I imagined the stuttering excuses Darnell would try to invent. I imagined the silence that would finally replace their endless insults. But then I looked through the glass again. I saw my father holding Darnell's hand, looking at him with a reverence he had never shown me, not even when I graduated with honors, not even when I won Teacher of the Year. He was looking at Darnell like he was a savior. If I walked in there and destroyed that illusion, they wouldn't thank me. They would hate me. They would hate me for being right, for being rich, and for shattering the fragile glass house of their egos. I realized then that my desire for their approval was a sickness I had been carrying for 34 years. It was a tumor, and I had just cut it out. I slowly brought my hands together. I ripped the receipt down the middle. The sound was sharp and final in the quiet hallway. I put the halves together and ripped them again, and again, until the proof of my generosity was nothing more than white confetti in my palm. "The debt is paid," I whispered to myself. I had paid for my father's life. That was the final installment on my obligation to this family. I owed them nothing else. Not my time, not my tears, and certainly not my mercy. I walked over to a gray metal trash can standing next to a vending machine. I held my hand over the opening and opened my fingers. The pieces of paper fluttered down into the darkness, landing on top of empty soda cans and discarded candy wrappers. It was a fitting resting place for their lies. I straightened my spine. The heavy feeling in my chest, the one that had been there since I was a little girl trying to bake lemon cakes to win a smile, was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. I turned my back on the recovery room. I did not look at my father again. The man in that bed was a stranger to me now. The woman crying fake tears of gratitude was a stranger. And the brother accepting praise for a check he didn't write was a target. They wanted a war on poverty. Fine. But they picked a fight with the wrong bank account. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking a steady, ominous rhythm on the linoleum floor. I was done being the victim. It was time to become the villain in their story, because that was the only role they would respect. The teacher was gone, the investor was awake, and she was coming for everything. The attack did not come with a physical blow, it came with a ping. It was Tuesday evening, and I was sitting at my kitchen island grading math worksheets when my phone lit up. Then it lit up again, and again. Within 10 seconds, the screen was a blur of notifications. I unlocked the device and opened Instagram. There it was. A post from Courtney's verified account. The image was grainy and blurry. It was a photo she had secretly taken during her invasion of my classroom 2 days ago. In the picture I was holding Leo, my autistic student, firmly by the shoulders. To anyone who knew Leo, they would know I was performing deep pressure therapy to help him de-escalate from a panic attack. It was an act of love and safety. But Courtney had cropped the photo. She had applied a high-contrast filter that made the lighting look harsh and sinister. In her version, it did not look like a hug. It looked like I was shaking a terrified child. The caption was a masterpiece of fiction. It read, "I have stayed silent for too long to protect my family, but I cannot stand by and watch this anymore. My sister-in-law, Zara Robinson, is a danger to the children she is supposed to protect. I witnessed her aggressively manhandling a special needs student who was simply trying to paint. It breaks my heart that the system lets monsters like this teach. Please share to save these kids. Hashtag protect the children. Hashtag fire Zara." I felt the blood drain from my face. I refreshed the page. The post had been up for 20 minutes and it already had 5,000 likes. The comments were a cesspool of hatred. People I had never met were calling for my arrest. They were calling me an abuser. They were tagging the school district and the police department. Then I saw the notification that cut deeper than any stranger's comment. Patricia Robinson shared a post. My own mother had reposted Courtney's lie. Her caption was short and devastating. She wrote, "I am so ashamed. We tried to raise her with values, but some people are just broken. I pray for that poor family." She was not just failing to defend me, she was leading the mob. She knew I would never hurt a child. She knew Leo loved me. But she did not care about the truth. She wanted me fired. She figured that if I lost my job, I would be desperate. If I was desperate, I would have to crawl back to them for money. And if I crawled back, they could force me to get the principal to sell the school building. It was a tactical nuclear strike on my career to secure a real estate deal. My phone began to ring. It was not a notification this time. It was the school board superintendent. I stared at the caller ID. The court of public opinion had already reached a verdict, and my sentence was being delivered before I even had a chance to speak. I let the call go to voicemail. I placed the phone face down on the marble counter. They wanted to paint me as a monster. They had no idea that by trying to destroy the teacher, they had just unleashed the tycoon. I was not going to delete my account. I was going to buy this platform. The telephone on Principal Henderson's desk was screaming. It had been ringing non-stop since 7 in the morning. Parents were calling in a panic. Donors were threatening to pull funding. The local news van was parked on the sidewalk outside filming B-roll of the playground through the chain-link fence. Inside the office, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and impending doom. Principal Henderson sat behind her cluttered desk, looking 10 years older than she had yesterday. She was a good woman who had dedicated her life to education, but she was not built for a media storm. She refused to look me in the eye. She kept shuffling the papers in front of her, her hands trembling slightly. "I am so sorry, Zara," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You know I love you. You know I believe you are the best teacher we have. But the board is furious. The insurance company is threatening to drop our liability coverage. They are saying you are a risk." My hands are tied. She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a letter of resignation, effective immediately. Before I could even reach for it, the man sitting in the leather chair in the corner spoke up. He was wearing a pinstripe suit that was trying too hard to look expensive and failing. He had introduced himself as Mr. Sterling, a legal representative for the Concerned Parents Association. I knew exactly who he was. He was Darnell's attack dog, a lawyer willing to do the dirty work that Darnell was too cowardly to do himself. Mr. Sterling leaned forward, flashing a smile that showed too many teeth. "It would be in your best interest to sign that, Ms. Robinson. If you resign quietly, we can perhaps convince the district not to press criminal charges. But if you fight this, we will bury you. We will make sure you never work within 500 feet of a child again." I sat perfectly still. My hands were folded in my lap. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not beg Mrs. Henderson to save me. I simply turned my left wrist over and glanced at my watch. It was 9:58 in the morning. Sterling mistook my silence for fear. He pressed harder, sensing blood in the water. "Look at the reality here," he sneered. "This school is already failing, the building is falling apart, and now its star teacher is a viral villain. The only way to save the reputation of this institution is to cut the cancer out. Resign. Let the board sell the property to Robinson Capital. They have made a generous offer to relocate the students. It is the only way out, Zara. Do the right thing for once." He was not there to protect the children, he was there to close the deal. Darnell had staged this entire crisis. He had Courtney destroy my reputation just to pressure the principal into selling the land. It was ruthless. It was evil. And it was exactly what I had anticipated. I looked at my watch again. 9:59. Mrs. Henderson looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Zara, please say something. Defend yourself. Tell me it is not true." I looked at her and offered a small, sad smile. "I do not need to defend myself against fiction, Mrs. Henderson, and I certainly do not need to resign." Sterling slammed his hand on the desk, making the principal jump. "You have no choice. You are finished in this town. Sign the paper." I ignored him completely. I watched the second hand on my watch sweep past the 12. It was 10 o'clock exactly. "Right on time," I said softly. The heavy oak door to the office did not just open, it was pushed open with authority. Two men in dark suits walked in, followed by a woman carrying a briefcase that cost more than Mr. Sterling's car. They did not look like school district employees, they looked like sharks entering a feeding frenzy. Mr. Sterling stood up indignant. "Who do you think you are? This is a private meeting." The woman ignored him and walked straight to me. She nodded respectfully. "Ms. Robinson, it is done." I stood up slowly. Mrs. Henderson looked confused. Mr. Sterling looked nervous. "I am not signing that resignation letter," I said, my voice filling the room with a calm, icy power. "Because you cannot fire the owner of the building." The silence in the office following my declaration of ownership was shattered not by a lawyer's objection, but by a roar from the street. It started as a low rumble and grew into a rhythmic chant that penetrated the thick brick walls of the school. Mr. Sterling looked at the window in alarm. He marched over and pulled back the blinds. His face turned pale as he looked down at the courtyard. "It is a mob," he spat, dropping the blinds. "Call the police, Mrs. Henderson. These animals are going to riot." They were not animals. They were a shield. Before the principal could reach for the phone, the office door swung open again. But this time it was not a corporate shark in a suit. It was Maria Leo's mother. She was still wearing her blue housekeeping uniform from her shift at the hotel. Her hands were rough from bleach and hard work. Behind her stood 50 other parents, filling the hallway and spilling out into the reception area. They held handmade signs. They held their children's hands, and they looked furious. Mrs. Henderson stood up nervously. "Maria, you cannot be in here. This is a private meeting." Maria did not back down. She walked straight up to the desk, ignoring Mr. Sterling completely. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and then turned to the principal. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a battered smartphone. "We saw the lies on the internet," Maria said, her voice shaking with emotion. "That woman with the expensive purse says Miss Zara hurts our kids. She says she is a monster. Well, we are here to show you who the real monster is." Maria placed the phone on the desk and pressed play. The screen showed a video feed. "We pooled our money last year," Maria explained, pointing at the screen. "We bought a nanny cam for the classroom, not because we did not trust the teachers, but because we wanted to see our children's progress. We never told the school because we knew you would cite policy and take it down. But thank God we kept it running." Everyone gathered around the small screen. The timestamp was from 2 days ago. The footage was grainy but undeniable. It showed Leo screaming in a sensory meltdown, throwing chairs. It showed me rushing over, not to hit him, but to catch him before he hurt himself. It showed me wrapping him in a tight compression hug, rocking him gently until his breathing slowed. It was an act of pure, desperate love. Then the camera captured the door opening. It showed Courtney walking in covering her nose. It showed her taking out her phone, snapping the picture from a misleading angle and laughing as she walked out. The room fell silent. Mr. Sterling loosened his tie, looking for an exit strategy. The video proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the abuse allegations were a fabricated lie designed to destroy a career. Maria looked at Sterling. "You want to fire the only person who treats our children like human beings. You want to listen to a rich woman who thinks our kids are broken merchandise. Go ahead. But you will have to drag every single one of us out of this building first." She turned to me and took my hand. Her grip was warm and calloused. "We got you, Ms. Zara. You fight for us every day. Today we fight for you." I looked at Maria. I looked at the sea of faces in the hallway. My own mother had thrown me to the wolves to secure a real estate deal. My brother had tried to frame me to cover his debts. But these people who had nothing, who struggled just to put food on the table, they had left their jobs and risked their safety to stand between me and the fire. I felt a tear finally escape my eye. I had spent my whole life chasing the approval of the Robinson family. I realized in that crowded office that I had been looking for family in the wrong place. My blood relatives were in the mansion, but my real family was right here, standing in work boots and uniforms, ready to go to war for me. The red light on the office telephone began to flash again, demanding attention. Mrs. Henderson looked at it with dread. She assumed it was another angry donor or perhaps a reporter asking for a comment on the abuse allegations. She reached for the receiver with a shaking hand, ready to deliver another apology or a no-comment statement. The room was still thick with the tension of the parents' protest, and Mr. Sterling was busy stuffing his papers into his briefcase, trying to escape the glare of 50 angry mothers. Mrs. Henderson lifted the phone to her ear. "Hello, this is Principal Henderson. I am afraid we are not taking media inquiries at this time." She paused. Her eyes went wide. The color drained from her face so fast that I thought she might faint. She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair back against the filing cabinet. "The governor's office," she repeated. Her voice cracked. She pressed the phone tighter against her ear. Yes, of course. I am listening." The room fell silent. Even the parents in the hallway stopped chanting. Mr. Sterling froze, his hand hovering over the door handle. A call from the governor was not a normal occurrence in a failing school district. Mrs. Henderson listened for a moment longer, and beads of sweat began to form on her upper lip. She looked at me. It was not the look of a superior reprimanding a subordinate. It was the look of a person realizing they were standing on a trapdoor that was about to open. "Yes, she is right here," Mrs. Henderson stammered. She looked at the phone as if it were a live grenade. "No, sir. We were not discussing her resignation. We were discussing her commendation. Yes, sir, absolutely." She lowered the phone slowly and extended it toward me. Her hand was trembling so violently that the cord rattled against the desk. "It is the governor's chief of staff," she whispered. "He wants to speak to you." I took the phone. I did not stand up. I did not look surprised. I brought the receiver to my ear and spoke in a calm, level tone. "Hello, Marcus?" The voice on the other end was bright and efficient. "Zara, good morning. Governor Thompson is panicking. He heard about the social media smear campaign against you. He wants to know if you still plan to attend the Winter Gala tonight. He was planning to announce the Education Reform Partnership, and he is terrified you are going to pull your funding because of the bad press." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs. "Tell the governor to relax, Marcus. I do not let petty gossip dictate my schedule. I will be there. And tell him to make sure my table is near the front. I might have a few guests with me." "Excellent," Marcus replied. "We have you listed as the VIP keynote speaker. We will see you at 7. I hung up the phone. I looked at Mrs. Henderson. She was wiping her forehead with a tissue, looking at me as if I had just sprouted wings. The transformation was instantaneous. The exhausted, defeated bureaucrat vanished. In her place was a fawning, terrified employee. Ms. Robinson. Mrs. Henderson said, her voice pitching up an octave. I had no idea you were close with the governor. Why did you not say something? This changes everything. Obviously, we will issue a statement clearing your name immediately. We can say the resignation letter was just a draft. A misunderstanding. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. Mr. Sterling looked like he wanted to vomit. He realized that the woman he had tried to bully was the guest of honor at an event his boss could not even get tickets to. Mr. Sterling, I said, turning to him, you can tell my brother that his attempt to get me fired has failed. And you can tell him that if he wants to see how real power works, he should watch the news tonight. I walked past the stunned principal and the terrified lawyer. I walked out into the hallway where Maria and the parents were waiting. I high-fived Leo. The teacher was safe. But tonight the investor was coming out to play, and she was bringing the whole neighborhood with her. The elevator ride to the 45th floor was the decompression chamber I needed. As the doors slid open, revealing the panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, the noise of the protests and the smell of the school hallway vanished. I was no longer Ms. Zara, the beleaguered teacher. I stepped onto the white marble floors of my penthouse and felt the shift in my posture. The slouch I had adopted to make myself look smaller, to make myself look less threatening to my family, straightened into the spine of a predator. I walked straight to the master suite. My dressing room was larger than the entire ground floor of my parents' house. It was a climate-controlled sanctuary of silk and leather. I bypassed the section of sensible beige cardigans and worn-out flats that I used for my cover. I walked to the back of the room where the glass cases held the clothes I had bought with my own hard-earned millions. Tonight was not a night for blending in. Tonight was a declaration of war. I needed armor. I ran my fingers across the fabrics. I stopped at a garment bag that had not been opened since I returned from Paris Fashion Week 2 years ago. I unzipped it slowly. Inside hung a custom gown made of liquid silk in a shade of deep midnight blue. It was structured and sharp with a plunging neckline and a slit that demanded attention. It did not look like a dress a teacher could afford. It looked like a dress that could buy the school board. I slipped out of my frantic day clothes and stepped into the gown. The silk was cool against my skin. It fit like a second skin tailored to my exact measurements. I looked at my reflection. The fabric caught the light shimmering like the surface of a deep, dangerous ocean. But the armor was not complete without the ammunition. I walked over to the vanity mirror. I pressed my palm against a hidden panel in the wall. A section of the mirror slid back, revealing a biometric safe. I scanned my retina. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, resting on black velvet, was the parure of the Northern Star. It was a diamond necklace and earring set I had won at a Sotheby's auction, beating out a Saudi prince. I lifted the necklace. The diamonds were cold and heavy. They were not the cloudy laboratory-grown stones Courtney tried to pass off as heirlooms. These were flawless D-color stones that refracted the light with blinding intensity. I clasped the platinum chain around my neck. The weight of it felt grounding. It sat on my collarbone like a badge of office. I sat down at the vanity. At Yaz. I pulled my hair back from my face, securing it in a sleek, severe knot that highlighted the sharp line of my jaw. I applied my makeup with the precision of a surgeon. Sharp, winged eyeliner, a contour that could cut glass, and finally a matte red lipstick that looked like a warning sign. I stood up and stepped into a pair of 6-inch Louboutin heels. The red soles flashed as I turned. I was 6 feet tall in them, towering and imposing. I looked at the woman in the full-length mirror. The tired victim was gone. The sister who begged for scraps was gone. Staring back at me was ZR, the phantom investor, the tycoon, the woman who held the deed to the city. My family thought they were going to a gala to schmooze and pretend to be important. They had no idea they were walking into their own execution. I picked up a clutch bag covered in Swarovski crystals and dropped my black titanium American Express card inside. It made a solid, confident sound. I took one last look at my reflection, adjusting the diamond necklace so it caught the maximum amount of light. Showtime. I whispered to the empty room. I turned off the lights, leaving the penthouse in darkness, and walked toward the elevator. The hunt was on. The wind outside the Grand Lyric Theater was biting, carrying the chill of Lake Michigan directly into the bones of the people waiting in line. The general admission queue stretched around the block, a sea of shivering bodies in rented tuxedos and polyester gowns. Standing right in the middle of the crush, looking miserable and out of place, was my family. I watched them through the tinted privacy glass of my Rolls-Royce Phantom as my driver slowly navigated past the chaos. They were huddled together near the security checkpoint, arguing with a bouncer who looked entirely unimpressed by their presence. Darnell was gesturing wildly, pointing at his watch and shouting about being a VIP. The bouncer simply pointed a gloved hand toward the back of the line. Patricia was shivering, clutching a faux fur wrap that she had likely put on a credit card she couldn't pay off. Courtney was huddled behind Darnell, checking her phone, probably deleting negative comments on her Instagram post to keep up the facade of popularity. My driver bypassed the main entrance completely. He steered the massive vehicle into the private porte cochere reserved for high-level donors and government officials. There was no line here. There was only a plush red carpet and a team of attendants waiting with umbrellas even though it wasn't raining. The car stopped. The heavy door was pulled open by a valet in white gloves. I stepped out. The flashbulbs erupted immediately. I did not flinch. I let the midnight blue silk of my gown cascade to the pavement. The diamonds at my throat caught the strobe lights of the paparazzi, sending prisms of light dancing across the entrance. I heard the whispers ripple through the press line. They were asking who I was. They were asking about the dress. They were asking about the power that radiated from me. I began to walk up the red carpet. It ran parallel to the general admission line, separated only by a velvet rope and a wall of security guards. I was less than 10 feet away from my family, but I might as well have been on a different planet. As I glided past, I heard Darnell's voice rise above the crowd noise. "Do you know who I am?" he screamed at the stone-faced security guard. "I am Darnell Robinson. I am a major developer in this city. I demand you let us through. My father just had surgery. We should not be standing in the cold." The guard didn't even blink. "Sir, if you step out of line again, I will have you removed from the property." Back of the line. I walked past them. My heels made no sound on the plush carpet. I saw Courtney look up. She saw the flashbulbs popping around me. She saw the silhouette of a woman dripping in wealth. She grabbed Darnell's arm and pointed her eyes wide with jealousy. "Look at her dress, Darnell," she whined, her voice carrying over the wind. "That is the new season couture. Who is she? Why does she get to walk in while we freeze?" They looked right at me. They looked at the sister they had called worthless. They looked at the daughter they had called a failure. And they did not recognize me. They were so blinded by the diamonds and the silk that they couldn't see the woman underneath. They worshipped money so fervently that they couldn't recognize their own blood when it was wrapped in success. I did not turn my head. I did not wave. I simply adjusted my clutch and walked through the heavy golden doors into the warmth of the gala. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of Darnell's begging and the howling wind. I was inside in the world of champagne and power. They were outside in the cold, exactly where they belonged. The transition from the freezing Chicago wind to the golden warmth of the Grand Lyric Ballroom was jarring. I stood near a massive marble pillar, holding a crystal flute of vintage Dom Perignon, watching the entrance. I had been inside for 10 minutes, enough time to be greeted by 3 senators and the mayor. I was comfortable. I was in my element. Then the doors swung open, and the Robinson family spilled in. They looked like refugees from a fashion disaster. My mother was rubbing her arms, her faux fur matted from the damp air. Darnell was red-faced, likely from screaming at the security guards. And Courtney was limping, her cheap heels having clearly failed her during the long wait on the concrete. I watched them scan the room with hungry, desperate eyes. They were looking for validation. They were looking for a waiter. They were looking for anyone they could look down on to make themselves feel better about being treated like cattle outside. Courtney spotted me first, but she did not see her sister-in-law. She saw a woman standing still near the VIP cordon. In Courtney's limited worldview, people who stood still were servants and people who moved were important. She saw the back of my midnight blue gown and assumed I was a high-end hostess or perhaps a station manager. She marched over to me, her limp disappearing under the force of her entitlement. She didn't even walk around to face me. She just spoke to my shoulder, her voice shrill and demanding. "Excuse me," she snapped, snapping her fingers near my ear. "I have been waiting in the cold for 40 minutes. I need a glass of Chardonnay, heavy on the pour, and tell the staff to bring a chair for my mother. She is a VIP. Chop chop." I took a slow sip of my champagne. The bubbles burst pleasantly on my tongue. I let the silence stretch for 3 agonizing seconds. I wanted her to feel the weight of her rudeness. I wanted her to commit fully to the mistake. "Hello," I said, whine. "Are you deaf?" Courtney hissed, reaching out to tap my shoulder with her acrylic nail. I pivoted. It was a slow, deliberate turn like a battleship bringing its cannons to bear. The movement caused the diamonds at my throat to catch the light from the chandeliers above. A blinding flash of white fire hit Courtney squarely in the eyes. She blinked, stumbling back a step. Then her vision cleared. She looked at the face she had mocked for years. She saw the sharp contour of my cheekbones, the blood-red matte lipstick, and the cold, amused glitter in my eyes. She looked down at the midnight blue silk that fit me like liquid armor. She looked at the clutch in my hand that cost more than her husband's car. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was a perfect imitation of a fish out of water. Her brain could not compute the data. This was Zara. But Zara wore cardigans. Zara smelled like chalk. Zara was poor. This woman looked like she owned the building. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile a wolf gives a lamb before dinner. "The bar is 50 feet that way, Courtney," I said, my voice smooth and cultured, carrying none of the hesitancy she was used to. "And I believe the staff only serves guests who have actually wiped the mud off their shoes." Courtney looked down at her feet. There on the pristine marble floor were faint, muddy footprints from her trek through the slush outside. She flushed a deep, violent crimson. She looked at me, then at the champagne in my hand, and for the first time in her life, she felt small. She didn't scream. She didn't insult me. She just backed away, clutching her purse to her chest, terrified by the stranger wearing her sister-in-law's face. Courtney's retreat did not bring peace. It brought the matriarch. Patricia Robinson had been watching from the edge of the crowd, her eyes narrowing as she saw her daughter-in-law back away in fear. She did not analyze the situation. She did not notice the glint of real diamonds or the cut of the fabric. She only saw one thing. Her disappointment of a daughter was standing in a room where she did not belong, likely embarrassing the family name. Patricia charged across the marble floor. Her faux fur wrap flapped behind her like the wings of a vulture. She did not care that she was making a scene. In her mind, she was the discipline. She stopped inches from my face, her breath smelling of cheap mints and bitterness. "Have you lost your mind?" she screeched, her voice cutting through the ambient jazz music like a serrated knife. Guests nearby stopped their conversations and turned to watch. "I check my phone and see you are the laughingstock of the internet for abusing children, and instead of hiding in shame, you are here, prancing around in a costume." She reached out and grabbed the fabric of my silk gown, rubbing it between her rough fingers as if testing for quality. She sneered in disgust. "Look at this. Did you raid the drama department's wardrobe closet? Or did you spend your entire year's salary renting a dress to pretend you are one of us? You look ridiculous, Zara. You look like a child trying to sit at the adult's table. Take this off before you rip it and lose your deposit." I pulled my arm away gently but firmly. "Hello, Mother. I was invited." Patricia laughed. It was a cruel barking sound. "Invited? By who?" "The janitor. You are a teacher, Zara. You wipe noses for a living. You belong in a classroom or a basement, not at the governor's gala. You are here to beg Darnell for money, aren't you? That is it. You came to humiliate us and beg for a handout in front of the elite. She didn't wait for an answer. She spun around and waved frantically at a passing security guard. Officer, over here, immediately. A large man in a dark suit approached. He looked serious. Patricia pointed a shaking finger at my face. I want this woman removed from the premises right now. She demanded, her voice rising to a shout. She is crashing this party. She is unstable. She is a disgraced schoolteacher who is harassing my family and trespassing. Look at her. She clearly doesn't belong here. Drag her out before she steals the silverware. The security guard looked at Patricia. Then he looked at me. He looked at the VIP badge pinned discreetly to my clutch. He looked at the face of the woman who had donated $2 million to the venue's renovation fund last year. Patricia was smiling triumphantly. She crossed her arms, waiting for the guard to grab me. She wanted to see me humiliated. She wanted to see me dragged out the back door so she could go back to pretending she had no daughter. She was so certain of her power. She had no idea she had just ordered a subordinate to arrest the boss. Well, Patricia snapped at the guard. What are you waiting for? Get this trash out of my sight. The guard took a step forward, but he did not reach for me. He reached for his radio. Dispatch, we have a disturbance in the VIP foyer, he said calmly, his eyes never leaving Patricia's face. I have an uninvited guest harassing the keynote speaker. Patricia's smile faltered. Keynote speaker. What are you talking about? I am talking about her. So am I, ma'am, the guard replied, stepping between us to shield me from her toxicity. Patricia stood there with her arm extended, pointing at the exit like a vengeful traffic cop. She was vibrating with anticipation, waiting for the moment the large man in the dark suit would lay hands on me and drag me out into the snow. She had already composed the narrative in her head. She would tell her friends that her unstable daughter had a breakdown and had to be institutionalized. She was so lost in her fantasy of control that she failed to notice the shift in the atmosphere. The security guard did not move toward me with aggression. He moved with the precision of a man approaching royalty. He stepped around my mother as if she were a piece of furniture that had been placed in an inconvenient spot. He stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me and snapped his heels together. It was not a casual nod. It was a bow, a deep, respectful inclination of the head that is reserved for heads of state and the people who sign the paychecks. Ms. Robinson, he said, his voice booming with authority. I apologize deeply for the disturbance. We did not realize you were being accosted by the general admission guests. We can have them removed immediately if they are bothering you. My mother's jaw unhinged. She looked from the guard to me and back again. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. It was as if her vocal cords had short-circuited. Darnell stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion. Wait a minute. You are making a mistake. She is nobody. I am Darnell Robinson. I am the VIP here. You should be bowing to me. The guard turned his head slowly to look at Darnell. His expression was one of mild pity. Sir, unless you are the keynote speaker or the primary benefactor of tonight's gala, you are standing in a restricted zone. Please step back behind the velvet rope. He turned his back on Darnell, dismissing him completely. He looked back at me and gestured toward the massive double doors that led to the main ballroom floor. The governor is waiting for you at the chairman's table, Ms. Robinson. He wanted to make sure you were comfortable before the speeches begin. Shall I escort you? The silence that fell over my family was absolute. It was the silence of a worldview shattering. The chairman's table, the governor, keynote speaker. These were words that belonged in their world, the world they desperately pretended to own, but they were being applied to the daughter they had discarded. I saw Courtney clutch Darnell's arms so hard her knuckles turned white. She looked at my dress again, and this time she didn't see a costume. She saw the truth. She saw that the diamonds were real. She saw that the power was real. I looked at my mother. She was trembling. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. She was trying to recalculate the equation, but the numbers didn't add up. How could the worthless teacher be the guest of honor? How could the scapegoat be the queen? I smiled at her. It was a small, polite smile. "I believe you are holding up the line, Mother," I said softly. "You should probably go find your seats. I hear the view from the back row is quite adequate if you squint." I nodded to the guard. "Lead the way." He unhooked the heavy velvet rope, creating a path for me. I stepped through, leaving my family standing on the other side. They looked like tourists, looking through the gates of a palace they were not allowed to enter. I walked into the ballroom, the guard flanking me like a Praetorian guard. I did not look back. I didn't need to. I could feel their eyes burning into my back, and for the first time in my life, the heat didn't hurt. It fueled me. The ballroom lights dimmed until the only illumination came from the single spotlight centered on the stage. Governor Thompson walked to the podium. He adjusted the microphone and looked out over the sea of faces. The room fell into a hush of expectancy. I sat at the chairman's table directly in front of the stage. I took a sip of water and resisted the urge to turn around. I knew exactly what was happening at table 42 near the kitchen service doors. The governor began to speak. His voice was deep and resonant, filling the cavernous hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing a crisis in our state. Our schools are crumbling. Our teachers are underfunded. Our children are being left behind. For months, my administration has been looking for a solution. We looked for a miracle, and we found one." He paused for effect. The crowd leaned in. "We found a partner, a silent guardian who approached us not for fame or political favors, but with a genuine desire to change the world. This individual has single-handedly funded the restoration of 5 inner-city schools. They have established a scholarship fund that will send 500 students to college debt-free." I could feel the energy in the room shift. People were whispering, asking who had that kind of capital. At the back of the room, Darnell sat up straighter. He turned to our mother, Patricia, and whispered loud enough for the tables around them to hear. "It is me, Mom. He is talking about the Skyline project. I told his aide that our development would bring value to the community. He is counting the future tax revenue as a donation. This is it. This is my moment." Patricia looked doubtful. She whispered back, asking if he really donated millions. Darnell waved his hand dismissively. "It is creative accounting, Mom. Just smile. We are about to be famous." He checked his tie in the reflection of a spoon. He adjusted his cufflinks. He was preparing to accept an honor he had not earned for a project that did not exist. The governor continued, building the suspense. "This donor is a mystery to many of you. They have operated under the radar, building a fortune in the tech sector while living a life of absolute humility. They saw value where others saw blight. They saw hope where others saw failure. While others tried to tear down our communities for profit, this person bought the land to protect it." Darnell's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The part about tearing down communities sounded suspiciously like an attack on his business model. But his ego was too large to let the doubt take root. He convinced himself that the governor was just using metaphors. "It has to be me," Darnell muttered to Courtney. "Who else has that kind of vision? Get your phone ready. Record my walk to the stage." He pushed his chair back. The legs scraped against the floor. He started to rise, halfway standing in a crouch, waiting for his name to be called. He was ready to wave. He was ready to bask in the applause. He looked around at the confused diners at his table and nodded at them, as if to say, "Yes, it is me, the hero you have been waiting for." The governor gripped the podium. He looked directly at me. His eyes were warm and full of respect. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stand and honor the president of the Phoenix Foundation, the woman who has quietly saved our future, the one and only mystery donor." Darnell stood up fully. He buttoned his jacket. He took a step into the aisle with a wide, triumphant grin. He opened his arms to embrace the adulation. He was the king of the world for exactly 1 second, Ms. Zara Robinson. The name hung in the air like a guillotine blade before dropping with lethal precision. The heavy theatrical spotlight swung from the stage. It sliced through the darkness, passing right over the cheap seats, where Darnell was standing with his arms half open, ready to embrace his glory. It did not stop at table 42. It continued its arc, sweeping across the ballroom until it landed squarely on table 1. The beam hit me with the force of a physical blow, blinding white and intense. The diamonds around my neck exploded into fire, refracting the light into 1,000 dazzling prisms. Time did not just stop, it shattered. For 3 agonizing seconds there was no sound, no applause, no music. Just the collective gasp of 500 of the city's most powerful people turning to look at the woman in the midnight blue dress. And then, there was Darnell. He was still standing in the aisle, frozen in a pose of premature victory. One hand was raised in a wave that would never be completed. His smile was stuck, a grotesque rictus of confusion that was slowly rotting into horror. He looked like a jester who had accidentally interrupted a coronation. He looked from the governor to me, and the realization hit him like a freight train. The $20,000 check, it was real. The school building, it was mine. The power he thought he had, it was all an illusion. I rose slowly. The silk of my gown rustled softly, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. I did not look at the governor yet. I turned my head just enough to lock eyes with my family one last time. I saw my mother Patricia clutch her chest, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. The color had drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and old. She was realizing that the daughter she had called worthless was the only reason she was even allowed in the building. I saw Courtney drop her phone. She had been recording Darnell's big moment, but instead she had captured the exact second his ego died. I smiled. It was the same smile I had given them when they threw the check at me, but this time there was no sadness behind it. There was only victory. The applause began as a ripple and then swelled into a roar. People were standing up. The mayor was clapping. The senators were nodding in respect. The sound washed over Darnell, drowning him out, making him small and insignificant. He slowly sank back into his chair, a broken man in a rented tuxedo. I turned my back on them forever. I began the walk to the stage, my heels clicking a rhythm of absolute triumph. I walked past the bankers who had denied Darnell loans. I walked past the developers who had laughed at his proposals. I walked toward the light where the governor was waiting with his hand extended. I was no longer the little girl baking cakes for approval. I was the architect of my own destiny, and I had just burned their house to the ground. The climb to the stage felt like an ascension. Every step took me further away from the girl who used to cry in the pantry, and closer to the woman who owned the city. I took my place behind the podium. The microphone smelled of metallic sanitizer. I gripped the sides of the stand and leaned in. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents in the ceiling. I scanned the room. I let my gaze drift over the front row of dignitaries. Then I lifted my eyes. I looked past the diamonds and the tuxedos. I looked straight into the shadows of the back of the room. I found table 42. I saw the 3 pale faces staring back at me. They looked like ghosts, haunting a feast they could no longer taste. "Thank you, Governor Thompson." I began, my voice steady and amplified, filling every corner of the hall. For a long time, I preferred to remain anonymous. I stayed in the shadows because I was taught from a very young age that my voice did not matter. I was told that unless I fit a specific mold, unless I chased a specific kind of superficial success, I was invisible. I paused, letting the words land. I saw my mother flinch as if I had thrown a stone at her. But there is a freedom in being invisible. When no one is watching you work, you can build foundations that are unbreakable. When no one expects anything from you, you have the freedom to become everything they said you could never be. I looked at the donors in the front row. We live in a world that is obsessed with price tags. We ask how much a building costs. We ask how much a car costs, but we rarely ask what a human soul is worth. I have seen people throw away family for a check. I have seen people sell their integrity for a seat at a table that was never set for them. And I have learned that the poorest people in this world are not the ones with empty bank accounts. They are the ones with empty hearts. A murmur of agreement went through the crowd. Darnell looked down at his lap, unable to meet my gaze. I invested in the Haven Learning Center and the Phoenix Foundation not for tax breaks or applause. I did it because I know what it feels like to be written off. I know what it feels like to be told you are a bad investment. To every child who has ever been told they are not enough, I say this. Your value is not determined by your inheritance. It is not determined by the approval of those who cannot see your light. You are the architects of your own future. I looked back at my family one last time. I let the pity wash out of me, leaving only peace. Tonight, we are not just saving a building. We are rewriting the definition of success. Thank you. I stepped back from the podium. The applause was not polite this time. It was thunderous. It was a standing ovation that shook the floorboards. I did not look at the back of the room again. I had said my piece. The past was behind me, and the future was shining as bright as the diamonds around my neck. The moment I stepped off the stage, the governor leaned in and whispered that my speech was the most moving thing he had heard in 20 years. We were walking toward the private VIP reception area, flanked by security when the barrier broke. It was not a breach by a fan or a protester. It was an invasion by my own flesh and blood. Patricia Robinson burst through the line of security guards with the force of a linebacker. She was no longer the scowling critic who had tried to have me arrested 20 minutes ago. She had undergone a miraculous transformation. Her face was wet with fresh theatrical tears. Her arms were wide open. She threw herself at me before the bodyguards could react, wrapping me in a suffocating embrace that smelled of cheap perfume and desperation. "My baby," she wailed loud enough for the press pool to hear. "My brilliant, beautiful baby. I knew it. I always knew you were special." She pulled back, gripping my shoulders, her nails digging into my silk dress. She looked at the cameras flashing around us and posed, tilting her head to catch the best light. "I am her mother," she announced to a reporter from the Chicago Tribune. "I raised her to be this way. I taught her everything she knows about charity. We are a team. The Robinson women are unstoppable." It was hard keeping her secret all these years, but we wanted to stay humble. I stood there stiff as a board, marveling at the sheer velocity of her lie. She was rewriting history in real time. She was claiming ownership of the very success she had tried to strangle in the cradle. Then came Darnell. He did not hug me. He used my physical presence as a battering ram to get to the governor. He slid into the circle, elbowing the governor's chief of staff out of the way. He was holding a stack of business cards in his sweaty palm, like a poker hand. Governor Thompson Darnell boomed, flashing a grin that looked like a snarl. "Darnell Robinson, CEO of Robinson Capital. And obviously the big brother who taught Zara everything she knows about finance." He shoved a card into the governor's breast pocket uninvited. "Since my sister is funding the education initiative, I assume my firm will be handling the construction contracts for the new schools. We should keep it in the family, right? It makes sense for synergy. I have the blueprints for the Skyline project right here in my car. We can pivot. We can turn those low-income blocks into a mixed-use educational luxury hub. Zara would love that. Wouldn't you, Zara?" He looked at me, winking conspiratorially. He actually believed that because we shared DNA, I would hand him millions of dollars in contracts. He thought my speech about integrity was just a marketing pitch. Courtney appeared at my elbow, holding her phone up for a selfie. She had deleted the hate post. Now she was live streaming. "Hey guys, I am here with my bestie and sister Zara. We just shut down the gala. Family first always. Love you, Z." I looked at them. The mother crying fake tears. The brother hustling for a contract. The sister-in-law chasing clout. They were a circus of greed performing under the spotlight I had built. They didn't feel shame. They didn't feel remorse. They only felt the proximity to power, and they were latching onto it like parasites. It was truly the most pathetic performance I had ever witnessed. Darnell was still shoving his business card at the governor's chest, his other hand gripping my shoulder as if we were partners in crime. He was mid-sentence rambling about zoning permits and synergy when I finally moved. I did not shove him away. I simply reached into my crystal clutch and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen once and held it up. There will be no contracts, Darnell. He stopped talking, looking down at me with a confused frown. What are you doing, Zara? Put the phone away. We are talking business. I looked at Governor Thompson. I apologize, Governor, but I cannot allow you to enter into a partnership with a man who is currently under investigation for federal racketeering and bribery. Darnell laughed nervously. That is a good joke, Zara. She has a weird sense of humor, Governor. I pressed play. The audio was crystal clear. It cut through the ambient noise of the reception hall. Darnell's voice, arrogant and unmistakable, drifted out of the speaker. A simple envelope with $10,000 clears up a lot of vision problems. Miller is going to find black mold. The fix is in. The color drained from Darnell's face so fast he looked like a corpse standing upright. The governor took a sharp step back, brushing his suit jacket as if Darnell had just contaminated him with a virus. That is out of context, Darnell stammered, his hands shaking. That is a deep fake. AI generated. It is not real. It is very real, I said, my voice cold and final. And so are the forensic accounting records I just emailed to the district attorney. I turned my head slightly to the left. 3 men in navy blue windbreakers emerged from the shadows behind the press pool. They did not look like gala guests. They moved with the heavy, purposeful gait of law enforcement. The lead officer stepped into the circle of light. Darnell Robinson. Darnell spun around looking for an escape route, but the security team had already blocked the exits. I stepped forward and handed the officer a heavy black flash drive. Here is everything, Detective. The recording of him bribing the city inspector, the falsified structural reports, and the bank records showing the withdrawal of family funds to pay off his gambling debts, which he then claimed were used for medical bills. My mother let out a strangled gasp. Gambling debts? What are you talking about? He sold the Porsche to save your father. I looked at Patricia. He leased the Porsche, Mother. And he didn't sell it. It was repossessed last week. I paid for Dad's surgery. The detective took the drive and nodded at me. Thank you, Ms. Robinson. We will take it from here. He turned to Darnell and pulled a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. Darnell Robinson, you are under arrest for bribery, fraud, and extortion. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Darnell tried to back away, bumping into a waiter tray full of champagne. Glasses shattered on the floor. No, you cannot do this. I am a VIP. I am the governor's partner. Mom, do something. Tell them who I am. Patricia stood frozen, her hands over her mouth, watching her golden son get spun around and cuffed. The metal clicked shut. The sound was louder than the applause had been. I stood perfectly still as they read him his rights. Darnell looked at me, his eyes wide with betrayal. You did this. You ruined me. You are my sister. I took a sip of my champagne and looked him dead in the eye. I am not your sister tonight, Darnell. I am the witness. Take him away. The police officers escorted Darnell toward the exit. His protests faded into the background noise of the gala, which had resumed with a nervous energy. I did not watch him go. My attention was fixed on the woman standing in front of me. Patricia looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Her faux fur wrap was slipping off her shoulder, and her mascara was smeared. She looked from the retreating figure of her son to me. Her eyes were not filled with remorse. They were filled with accusation. He is your brother, she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. How could you let them take him? He saved your father. He paid the bills when no one else could. Even if he made mistakes in business, he stepped up when it mattered. You are a monster, Zara. You just destroyed the man who saved our family." I took a step closer to her, invading her personal space for the first time in my life. I lowered my voice to a whisper that was colder than the winter wind outside. "He did not save anyone, Mother. He has been bankrupt for 6 months. I was the one who walked into the billing office at 2 in the morning. I was the one who swiped the card for $150,000. I was the one who stood outside the recovery room and tore up the receipt so you could keep your fantasy intact." Patricia froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She blinked rapidly, trying to process the information. She looked at my dress. She looked at the diamonds. She looked at the hardened resolve in my eyes. The truth finally began to sink in. The money, the power, the salvation. It had been me all along. I saw the shift in her eyes. It was a flicker of panic. She realized she had bet on the wrong horse. She reached out a hand toward me, her expression softening into a manipulative plea. "Zara, baby, why didn't you tell me? We can fix this. We can." I did not let her touch me. I took a sharp step back. "There is no we, Patricia. I bought Dad's life because I am a decent human being, not because I wanted your love. I stopped wanting that a long time ago. You spent 30 years breaking me down to build him up. Now look at the result. Your masterpiece is in handcuffs, and your failure is standing in diamonds." I turned to the security guard who was standing respectfully a few feet away. "Please escort this woman to the exit. She is no longer a guest. She is trespassing." Patricia gasped. "Zara, you cannot do this. I am your mother." I looked at her one last time. I looked at the woman who had made me feel small my entire life, and I felt absolutely nothing. The cord was cut. "I have no mother." I said, my voice flat and final. "I am an orphan by choice. Do not call me. Do not come to my school. If you need money, ask your golden son to bail you out." I turned my back on her. I heard her start to scream my name, but the sound was cut off as the heavy doors swung shut behind me. I walked back toward the ballroom where the governor was waiting. I was alone. I was familyless. And for the first time in 34 years, I was free. The heavy double doors of the Grand Lyric Theater closed behind me, shutting out the noise of the applause, the weeping of my mother, and the chaos of my brother's arrest. The silence of the winter night rushed in to meet me. The wind was still biting, but it no longer felt cold. It felt crisp. It felt clean. It felt like the first breath of air after emerging from a deep, dark underwater cave. I walked down the red carpet alone. The paparazzi were still there, shivering behind the barricades. When they saw me, the flashbulbs erupted again, turning the night into a stroboscopic storm. This time I did not just walk past them. I stopped. I looked directly into the lenses. I gave them one final enigmatic smile. They were capturing the image of a woman who had just burned her past to fuel her future. My driver, silent and professional, as always, held open the door of the Phantom. I slid into the back seat. The heavy door clicked shut with a reassuring thud, sealing me inside a cocoon of hand-stitched leather and walnut wood. "To the penthouse, Ms. Robinson," the driver asked, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. I hesitated. I looked out the tinted window at the Chicago skyline. The city was a grid of lights, a vast network of lives and stories. Somewhere out there was my school. Somewhere out there were Leo and Maria and the parents who had stood up for me. That was my reality. This gala, the diamonds, the drama, it was just a necessary exorcism. "Home, James," I said softly. "Take me home." As the car pulled away from the curb, I reached up and unclasped the heavy diamond necklace. I let it slide into my palm, feeling the cool metal against my skin. It was a beautiful object, but it was heavy. I placed it back into my clutch. Tonight I had worn armor. Tomorrow I would wear my cardigan. Tomorrow I would sit on the floor with Leo and help him stack blocks. Tomorrow I would sign the paperwork to fully fund the new art program. That was where my power truly lived. Not in the boardroom, but in the classroom. I watched the city blur past the window. For 34 years I had been running a race I was never designed to win. I had been sprinting toward a finish line held by people who kept moving it further away. I had wanted them to see me. I had wanted them to love me. But in the end, the only person who needed to see me was the woman in the mirror. I took a deep breath. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest since childhood was gone. The silence in my phone was not lonely. It was peaceful. I had no mother to guilt me. I had no brother to use me. I was an orphan by decree, and I had never felt more whole. The car turned onto the highway, accelerating toward the future. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes. A real smile, one that reached all the way to my soul, spread across my face. The war was over, and I had won the only prize that mattered, my life. Now I want to turn this over to you. We have all had people in our lives who made us feel small so they could feel big. We have all chased validation from people incapable of giving it. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save your own sanity? Did you find peace on the other side? Tell me your story in the comments below. Let's support each other in breaking the cycle, because sometimes walking away is the strongest step you can take. This story serves as a powerful reminder that your self-worth is never determined by those who refuse to see it. Zara's journey illustrates that seeking validation from toxic family members is often a losing battle. Her true strength did not come from her hidden wealth, but from her courage to finally stop performing for an audience committed to misunderstanding her. We learn that family is defined by loyalty and respect, not just blood. Sometimes the healthiest move is to cut the cord, embrace your own path, and realize that your peace is far more valuable than their approval. If you believe that walking away from toxicity is an act of self-love, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience.